After many long, stressful weeks of writing, preparing, and actually filming the pilot for Lost, the project's future was still very much in danger. Lloyd Braun's attempt to transfer Lost from Disney to Warner Bros. Television had failed, the resistance against the show was immense, and the promotion of Stephen McPherson as the new head of ABC almost seemed like the final nail in the coffin for the survivors of the plane crash, who might never be able to find a way home. Even though he probably would have gotten the support from the higher-ups, McPherson wouldn't just kill Lost before actually having seen what Abrams and the whole team produced. If Abrams and his crew wanted to convince the network that Lost was worth picking up, they still had to finish the pilot, as the raw material they filmed still had to go through the post-production process. Responsible for the editing was Mary Jo Markey, who had been working with Abrams since 1998, when she was hired by Matt Reeves to edit episodes for Felicity. She quickly got along well with Abrams and became one of his frequent partners, building on a mutual understanding and trust. Her work on Lost, however, didn't begin after the actual production, but right after filming started in the middle of March, where she would work with the daily footage that was sent to her, and after constant consultation with Abrams.
Yeah, we had a really good time on it, because he would just, every time that he was waiting for a shot to set up, he would call and ask me what I was cutting, and I would tell him how I was doing it, and a couple of times I was sort of suggesting, even on the phone, kind of big changes in scenes, like losing the whole middle part of a scene. And when he knew it was going to be too long, and when I would explain why, a lot of the times, then he sort of never even saw the original way it was meant to shoot, meant to play. It needed it, though.
Markey argued against using any of the very costly helicopter footage that was produced, as there were no characters present to view the action from such a perspective. Instead, her approach was to work empathetically by trying to put herself in the position of the survivors and imagining what they were feeling.
They were filming in Hawaii, and I was the only one that was in Los Angeles cutting. And, I got the dailies for this opening section, and the very first shot is obviously meant to be Jack's eye opening, and it just kind of gave me this idea that I was going to cut everything from his point of view, everything in that opening sequence, because there were plenty of ways I could have cut it, but that I was going to really try to stay true to being in Jack's point of view, to the point that I really wanted the audience, it's a very visceral sequence, and I really wanted the viewer to feel like they were having Jack's experience as he was having it. So my plan was to not cut to anything unless Jack took us there. And then, I know you're talking about, there is a kind of an abrupt change in style, although still all from Jack's point of view, but the opening where he's actually been unconscious, we assume. He's probably in medical shock. He is completely confused and probably still just coming to consciousness about where he is and what's happening. He stands up, he puts his hand in his pocket, and he sees the little bottle, from a liquor bottle from the kind of thing that you get on an airplane, and it kind of starts bringing things back to him, but it's still long, long shots until we finally get to the actual crash site, and then the cutting style changes, and I'm sure it'll be very obvious to you, but it changes to shorter pieces, more pieces. There are line crosses, jump cuts, changes in screen direction, and it actually isn't kind of cutting I normally do, but it seemed right here because it's no longer orderly. What's happening to him is no longer orderly. It's chaotic. He's completely disoriented, and he doesn't know where to look. And so I'm trying to create that sense in the viewer that you don't know where to look either. There's so much going on, but always trying to stay with him.
After filming concluded, she was finally joined by Abrams and Lindelof. By that time, they only had about 9 days to put a cut together, with a big portion of that time spent on the unusually long first act and them entering picture lock by May 6, 2004. The result of their efforts was a full movie with a running time of 83 minutes. A comparison with the 97-page final production draft of the script reveals quite a few differences, which is quite normal as the editing process is often referred to as the final rewrite. The reason behind those changes from script to film were abundant. Some scenes, for example, don't always work as intended, and sometimes they are just too long and cause pacing issues. One instance in the pilot is the very first encounter between Jack and Kate, in which Kate takes care of Jack's wound. This scene was originally intended to be one uninterrupted sequence that would have gone on for about 5 minutes. It was then cut into 2 segments and interspliced with footage of other survivors at the beach, like Sawyer smoking a cigarette, which was originally supposed to happen much later in the pilot. While these changes were more or less driven by creative decisions, there is the important business-driven factor of the time frame, as TV productions have to leave enough room for commercial breaks, for which a show like Lost was written for. Judging by the rule of thumb that one written page equals about 1 minute of screen time, over 10 minutes of footage had to be cut from the pilot to fit into the 42 minutes per hour format, with most of the cut material being just shortened dialogue. The first example of this goes back again to the first encounter between Jack and Kate. According to the first draft of the script, Kate originally claimed to have been working in Sydney. According to a later version of the script, she claimed to have been in New Zealand. Jack's monologue about not being afraid was also a bit longer, as he compared fear to in-laws and the feeling of a milkshake on a hot day. Another scene that was dramatically shortened was the introduction of Sawyer, who was supposed to have a brief but harsh interaction with Charlie.
Are you sure you want to be smoking with the plane stuff?
You sure you want me to shove my foot up your ass?
Which can even be traced back to the original outline in which Sawyer clashed with Hurley. According to the script, Sawyer was still supposed to make a similar appearance. The scene was even filmed in a slightly less aggressive version, but it didn't make the cut either way. Instead of this, he can only be seen walking off in the original cut without saying a word, making him even more mysterious and less unsympathetic. Furthermore, he was completely cut from a scene in which a group including Jack, Kate, and Charlie talk about looking for the cockpit. The scene was filmed with him.
It's okay, I don't really feel like sitting still, so.
Yeah, this is genius. Going into the jungle after that sound last night. The thing that moved those trees. Yeah. It's a great idea.
What's going on?
Nothing.
When they show up to rescue us while you're gone, we're not waiting around.
Let's go. She's coming too? Excellent.
But even though he can still technically be seen, the editing creates the illusion that Jack looks at Charlie. In fact, it is Josh Holloway on screen, not Dominic Monaghan. Another scene that was cut short was actually the last one they filmed for the pilot, and it involved Hurley, who handed out food from the plane. He originally offered some food to Locke, who lingered on the beach motionless without responding to Hurley. Apparently, he just wasn't hungry. His brief screen time was thus cut down even further. There was also an interaction between Kate and Saeed planned for the 6th act, before the group led by Kate sets off to send a rescue signal from higher ground. In this scene, Saeed suggests that Kate wants to leave the island even more urgently than he does. Presumably, this suggestion made the revelation that Kate has a criminal past too predictable and was thus removed from the pilot. During the hike, Shannon and Charlie were also supposed to have a small conversation, with Charlie again bringing up his drive shaft career to gain some attention, only to completely fail.
Funny story, you'll love it. You ever heard of Drive Shaft? A band?
Oh, I hate them.
Okay.
Besides those deleted scenes, there were 2 more that fit in another category, because they had an actual impact on the story, consequences for the character dynamics, and thus some potential for drama in later episodes. The first scene involved Michael, who set out to find the dog Vincent after Jack told him that he saw him alive and well earlier, all in an effort to connect to his estranged son, Walt.
Hey, Walt! Looking for this?
The other scene was about the heavily wounded Marshall. While he originally was supposed to die early on in the original draft of the pilot, he would survive a bit longer after the rewrites. Nevertheless, he was still planned to succumb from his injuries near the end of the pilot after warning Jack about the dangerous Kate. Another part of post-production are the visual effects, meaning all of the computer-generated effects to enhance everything that was created on set and caught on camera. The responsible person for this was visual effects supervisor Kevin Blank, who had already worked with Abrams on Alias. He, of course, couldn't handle this task on his own, especially because he had to spend some time on the set during the production of the pilot. Instead, he delegated certain scenes to a number of different production studios and freelancers, who were simultaneously working on more than 200 VFX shots to finish all the effects on a very tight schedule. This turned out to be so complicated that Blank vowed to never do something like this again. The turbine and its explosion was taken on by Kaya Inc. by artists such as Jonathan Spencer-Levy and Scott Dewis. The running engine was of course done with computer graphics, while the actual explosions were done on set with practical special effects, and only enhanced by their VFX work. Kevin Kuchevar's Himani Productions was tasked with the mysterious monster's very first appearance during the first night of the survivors being on the island. For this, John Tereda drew a digital matte painting of the island as a background, which was then combined with hundreds of computer-generated palms, for which Kevin Blank recorded real palm trees on location in front of a blue screen for reference. By bending those artificial trees, the monster's movement and enormous strength could be demonstrated without having to reveal the monster itself. In reality, there are no trees at all, and the actors just stood in front of a blue screen. A blue screen was also used for the climbing sequence towards the end of the pilot, in which Evangeline Lilly and her new colleagues were never in any real danger, as they were only superimposed onto a mountain. The mountain they were climbing was indeed just a tiny hill on the roadside. The last scene that required a lot of effort was the third flashback sequence, in which the plane is torn apart mid-air. The production company Digital Dimensions even worked with two different branches at the same time to get the workload done. To achieve this effect, they created the tail section in the computer to seamlessly connect it with the green screen footage. The clouds that thus became visible after the disaster were, however, less artificial, as those were real photos taken by Kevin Blank during his flights between Los Angeles and Oahu. Additionally, Bob Lloyd's Fuzzy Logic Productions took care of many of the smaller details, like adding smoke effects or digitally removing cables from the crane that lifted the wing in the first act. The deadline, however, didn't allow them to complete their work on the original cut, which can mostly only be spotted in direct comparison. The completion would thus be done at a later date, when it would be confirmed that ABC would actually pick up the show. However, their work was not yet done even after reaching picture lock, as the pilot still had to go through the sound mixing, which was in the hands of Tom DeGorter, Frank Morone, and Scott Weber, who had to work day and night through the whole weekend, from Friday afternoon to Monday morning, to meet the deadline. Sleep was not an option for them at this point in time. Supervising sound editor Tom DeGorter had to check the pilot to find scenes and lines where the audio from the filming couldn't be used. He thus ordered some actors like Evangeline Lilly to the soundstage to re-record some of her lines in the looping process, which is still quite noticeable in some scenes of the original cut.
No. I'm glad you came, Charlie.
No. I'm glad you came, Charlie.
The sound effects at the time were just temporarily inserted to create and enhance the eerie atmosphere of the mysterious island. The opening shot of Jack opening his eyes, for example, already creates the impression that Lost might be some kind of horror movie. While the sound effects are a very important and easily overlooked part, they are still just a small piece in the overall puzzle compared to the original musical score. that gives the show its own identity. Composer Michael Giacchino, who previously worked on Abrams' Alias, already took part in early discussions about the show and was envisioned to be the one providing the score for Lost as well. However, there was absolutely no time for him to write and record any kind of music in such a short amount of time. While many aspects of the extremely rushed production of the Lost pilot were an anomaly in the TV business, this is rather normal, as the score is usually the last stage of the post-production process and only done at a later time and date. Instead, production teams often rely on temp music to convey the mood they intend the show to have. In the case of Lost, they used music from other well-known artists and movies, picked by executive producer and soundtrack enthusiast Brian Burke and editor Mary Jo Markey. Their original cut utilizes the opening music from the science fiction classic Blade Runner by Vangelis. Which transitions into the song Eternity from the soundtrack of The Thing by Ennio Morricone. The aftermath of the crash sequence is accompanied by a song from Hans Zimmer's score for the World War II drama The Thin Red Line. Bernard Herrmann's cue The Bedroom from Psycho plays during the search for Jack after the monster's attack at the cockpit. And the music that's heard during the polar bear attack is lifted from James Horner's score for Aliens. In addition to a proper pilot, the people in charge of a television network also often demand what they call a show Bible from their showrunners before they make a decision on whether or not to pick up the show. There are two different kinds of show Bibles. One kind refers to internal reference guides which are maintained and extended throughout the course of a show so that the writers don't lose track of their own story. They can add up to several binders of notes and information and are often in the hands of specialized script coordinators. The other kind of show Bible is more like an extended sales pitch with lots of information about the show, including the concept behind it, ideas how it might work in the long run, and questions that the network might have that might need to be addressed in advance. Chris Carter, creator of The X-Files, was not a fan of these Bibles because they limit the creative process. Whether such a series Bible is fundamentally important for the writers or just an inconvenient requirement by the network can't be answered with a simple this or that. But the truth is out there, and probably somewhere in the middle of both ends of that spectrum. At least, that's how J.J. Abrams saw it when describing the Lost Bible.
But what happened was, we wrote the pilot, then we had to write basically a Bible, which was like, where does the show go? What are the sort of the big movements of the series? And as you write that, what you do is you find that, there are things that you think, that's going to be great. But episode 3 in, you go, no, we're never doing that. Like, the Bible ends up changing enormously. But what the closer you get, I always think it's sort of like, it's like climbing a mountain in the fog. Like, the closer you get to the top, the more you realize, there are paths you're going to take you never could have anticipated. There are the big pieces, yes, there are the big pieces that we know we want to get to. Those haven't changed, but like along the way, there are so many different things, so that there will be probably, because you don't know how long the show's going to last.
Right.
Like, they don't say to you, okay, we want it to last 3 seasons. We're like, great. They'll want it to go on for 50 seasons.
So in other words,
exactly.
You knew from almost the beginning whether or not, for example, this thing is a dream or not, or if this is heaven or hell or not.
Right. And one of the great things that Damon said at the very beginning, and this was to me the key, he said, there should not be one answer to this show. It shouldn't be like a Sixth Sense, like, oh, and they're dead, and that's why everything.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it has to be more than one thing going on.
This document, labeled Series Format by Abrams and Lindelof, was completed on May 5, 2004, consisted of 27 pages, and is above all the product of the work of the members of the think tank that had been working with Lindelof since the end of February to come up with ideas for upcoming episodes and to flesh out the background stories for all the characters while the pilot was in production on Oahu. The first part deals mainly with the series in general, what the first season could look like, what genres the show would cover, and whether or not there would be guest appearances. Since Stephen McPherson was rather critical of Abrams' other show, Alias, both in content and the narrative, Abrams and Lindelof seemingly felt that they would have to hide at least a part of the true nature of the show that they actually had in mind. For example, in the series format document, they claimed that Lost would, with some rare exceptions, consist of standalone episodes. This was a basic concern of network executives because they feared that viewers would tune out of the show, and if they missed an episode, would not be able to keep up with the show anymore. All of this happened in a time when it was not yet possible to get access to any show on demand, and people had to use a VCR or DVR to avoid missing an episode. It was then also harder to gain new viewers for the same reason. The show would become less attractive for the later syndication, meaning the licensing of the show to other networks, who would repeat the show, which also needed to be taken into consideration. Another small but significant paragraph addresses the topic of science fiction, which can, at least in the minds of network executives, be too crazy or confusing and thus not appealing enough to reach mass audiences. By referencing the works of Michael Crichton, Abrams and Lindelof claimed that they would provide rational, real-world explanations for the seemingly bizarre. The claim was made first and foremost to address the worries about the monster in the pilot. The story they sold to the network was that the Medusa Corporation came to the island and built several research stations. One of their projects, a specimen often internally suggested to be a cloud of nanobots, would have accidentally gotten out of control and now roam the island, with the French distress call being one of Medusa Corporation's last signs of life. The series format itself, however, only hints at those details, suggesting that the so-called monster may have man-made origins and was the result of experiments or part of a security system designed to protect the other facilities on the island. This story, resembling the 2002 novel Prey by Michael Crichton, was ultimately more or less just another attempt to sell the show to the network, with no intention of actually going into that direction. The second part of the document focuses on the characters, without whom any series would ultimately fail, no matter how ingenious or sophisticated the show's mythology might turn out to be. While no character description and backstory was set in stone at this point, everything still needed to be in line with the characters depicted in the pilot. And since most of them were only introduced in a rather loose way without many given details, this was not really a big issue. While some characters like Michael and Walt remained almost untouched since their inception, other figures changed rather drastically. The evolution of Hurley is a prime example of this. Initially conceived as an older NRA redneck in his 50s with a receding hairline, he was very much adjusted after the casting of Jorge Garcia. However, the pilot did show some of the remnants of the beer-drinking guy with his lack of spelling skills. But since he was initially also supposed to be killed off, there was no need to come up with a background for him. But for the series format document, he needed one. What they came up with was the idea that he was an extremely charming repo man who was so nice that he could talk everybody out of anything and was in Sydney to retrieve an expensive yacht. This wasn't always an easy situation for the actors because they didn't always know what kind of character they were playing until they shot their backstory. Ian Somerhalder, for example, expressed his issues when he said that he assumed for a long time he was playing a lunatic. This was the case because Boone was once designed to be suffering from schizophrenia, likely inspired by the character Jed from Jeffrey Lieber's script. This would subsequently spark further conflicts as he would sooner or later run out of his medication. This approach to his character, however, would eventually be scrapped, presumably because of the sensitive nature of the matter, and also the clear similarities to Charlie, who would also go through withdrawal without access to his drugs, as established in the pilot. The actual stories that would be told on the show after the pilot are the center of the third part of the series format document. As usual in the creative process, in the TV business, the writers come up with as many ideas as possible, filter out the worst, and in the end, develop the best of them. One idea among many was the obvious one, that the wildlife on the island would turn out to be a big threat. According to Javier Grillo-Marqu's watch, Saeed was, for example, supposed to fight the giant snake that was cut from the pilot. While the snake or even intelligent dolphins didn't make it into the series format document, predatory jungle cats attacking the survivors did, just like dangerous ants that were eating up wild berries and thus endangering a food source. More serious problems would be caused by the other people that are inhabiting the island. After being renamed from jungle creeps to simply the others, their existence should be hinted at as early as possible. While a mass abduction of survivors was already planned in the original outline from January 2004, it was cut from the pilot and didn't make it into the first draft of the script. The idea itself, however, wasn't scrapped and was supposed to be used by episode 3 or 4. Their first on-screen appearance was supposed to happen later, though, when Shannon was to become another kidnapping victim when she goes too deep into the jungle. Sawyer and Boone would then have to overcome their problems with each other to rescue her. More drama would emerge from other interpersonal conflicts between the survivors. An example would be the episode tentatively titled The Choice, in which Kate wants to help a heavily burnt passenger by euthanizing him, something Jack would be opposed to. Another idea was a possible romance between Michael and Sun, to the disapproval of Jin and Walt, who in turn would team up. Taken together, the series format offers a lot of content with 14 characters, 34 island stories, and an outlined mythology to prove that the proposed show has the potential to become a long-running show that they can build upon in case the network would give them the chance to realize their ideas. What is remarkable, however, is the fact that the idea for flashbacks are almost completely withheld in the document. In fact, the only concrete example for them is mentioned in the description of an episode named The Cat Problem, in which Locke goes hunting for jungle cats, while those actions on the island are contrasted with his past as an office drone. And yet, they were a major part of the concept for the show, with the plan for the first season to utilize flashbacks as a tool to provide some relief from the limiting island setting, and as a way to explore the characters not yet affected by the island storyline, with the focuses on stories that would explain why said characters were in Sydney and why they were on their way to Los Angeles. Those flashbacks, usually not popular on network television, would then in return ironically offer a good compromise between standalone episodes and an ongoing narrative. Another plan for the season that is repeatedly addressed but not explained in detail in the series format goes back to the beginning brainstorming sessions between Abrams and Lindelof, according to which the survivors would find some strange piece of metal alloy. This metal alloy evolved into the idea of them finding a hatch as discussed during the writers' meeting on February 24th. The hatch would then be the foundation for a suggested episode with the title The Dig, in which they would discover a piece of metal jutting from rocky ground. The plan was to have the survivors find the hatch, thereby giving them the task of trying to open it and finally reaching their goal by the end of the season. When the discovery would happen and who would be involved was of course not yet set in stone. However, the basic idea was already there and one of the first long-term goals. Discussions between Abrams and Lindelof actually went beyond that and even included the final scene of the show, which was decided upon early on. That, however, led to the question of what events would lead up to this scene and what purpose it would serve in the context of the whole show. But due to the circumstances, it was almost impossible to forge something that could really be classified as a concrete plan. Too many moving parts simply prevented this, the most prevalent being the unknown number of episodes they would have to tell their story. Since they already knew that the network under the new leadership didn't seem to be very happy with Lost, indicated by the request to shoot another ending to the pilot to end it as early as possible, chances were that Lost wouldn't survive for more than a few weeks without the support of the higher-ups. In this case, the story would be drastically changed and likely result in a battle between the survivors and the monster, with most of the puzzle pieces they already had in mind likely never even coming into play. Lloyd Braun was aware of the lacking support and didn't want to stand back doing nothing to save Lost from obscurity, while Abrams, Lindelof, and their entire crew had no choice but to wait for the decision by the network. Braun was, however, running out of options after his proposed deal to Warner Bros. TV back in March didn't work out. As a last resort, he turned to Mark Graboff of NBC Entertainment to yet again find a new home for his dream project, in case McPherson wouldn't like it. People at NBC, however, were also skeptical. Not only was the nature of this offer extremely unconventional, according to some insiders, the work that Abrams had done in the past 4 months was said to look rather disappointing, raising even more concerns as to why NBC should be willing to throw money at something that just was not good. However, Braun insisted that the cheapskates at ABC had no idea that they were sitting on a gold mine. To substantiate this claim, Braun is said to have made the offer to get them a copy of the original cut, which was easy to do due to his connection with Abrams. This went so far that Braun allegedly reached out to an assistant of NBC president Kevin Reilly to send him a VHS copy directly to his mailbox. Reilly allegedly even saw the pilot, but had to decline as well, if nothing else but for legal reasons. Another reason why the proposed deal might have fallen through, though not a deciding factor, was the curious fact that NBC was already working at the same time on a similar project, which was coincidentally reported on the same day as Lost was restarted with Abrams and Lindelof at the helm. Stephen McPherson, back when he was still just the head of Touchstone Television, even commented on the situation and proclaimed that he loved the competition. The show with the title Eden was to be produced by Mark Burnett of Survivor fame. Island adventures were familiar territory for him. Something similar could be said about writer Douglas Day Stewart, who initially wanted to adapt Eden into a movie. He previously wrote the script for the film adaptation of the novel The Blue Lagoon from 1980. Stewart had very big ambitions for Eden, nothing less than reinventing television. According to the press release, the show would center around a group of people from wildly different backgrounds being stranded on a remote island. NBC ordered 2 scripts in addition to a show Bible in January 2004, but was supposedly not satisfied with the results. Apparently, they didn't even get to produce a pilot. However, back at ABC, they still had to make a decision about what to do with the Lost pilot. The original cut was then eventually presented to Stephen McPherson and the other executives in one of Disney's own movie theaters on the ABC lot. What exactly transpired behind closed doors is unclear due to wildly differing reports on the matter. Braun, for example, heard from some insiders that the screening didn't go down well. McPherson was even said to have left the screening without discussing it with his colleagues, which led some people to assume that Lost was dead. McPherson publicly stated that some people were even standing up and cheering, while others expressed doubt because they thought the show was too risky. Overall, however, it seemed to be a more positive response. On May 12, 2004, Variety reported only strong positive reactions. Even Bob Iger, who was highly critical of Lost early on, was now said to have been very impressed by the high quality of the pilot. However, the concern whether Lost could work as a long-running format remained. On May 13th, another screening took place, this time to see how the general public responded to the network's ambitious new project. This, in and of itself, was nothing special and part of everyday life in the film and television business. The way in which the screening was done, however, was quite exceptional for the time, as the screening didn't take place on the ABC and Disney premises, but in thousands of U.S. homes in cooperation with the market research company TNS Intersearch. Such screenings, known as cable previews, had already taken place back in the 1970s when networks like NBC used it without the public ever knowing much about it. Even high-ranking employees of those networks supposedly didn't always know about this concept. For this process, the networks bought certain spots on regional cable channels, which were often used for teleshopping, game shows, or similar programs. A select number of people were then contacted and informed where and when to tune in, to eventually be able to answer questions and give additional feedback in very detailed telephone conversations. The higher-ups at ABC didn't like this approach at the time. Instead, people were invited to a movie theater to watch and evaluate a film or TV pilot, a process that evolved over time. For example, audiences had to press certain keys or buttons when a scene was particularly funny or sad, in addition to them being filmed and their pulse being measured. The standard procedure, of course, also included questionnaires that had to be completed on site. In subsequent interviews, audiences could then express themselves more clearly and even make wishes and suggestions on how the product could or should be improved. Another standard is the non-disclosure agreement that prohibits the publication of information about the screening. This NDA was especially important for making a choice between the two methods. The argument for cable previews was that viewers should be in their natural environment so that realistic results could be achieved, as opposed to the test screenings in a movie theater that provide a more controlled environment. Why ABC changed their approach for the test screening of the Lost pilot is not exactly clear, but was most likely due to time restraints as well as needing wider feedback. This feedback was gathered after the screening via lengthy phone calls with the audience that was invited and informed about the event. The series of questions, for example, included whether the viewer would have a problem with Sun and Jin being permanently subtitled, whether they would prefer the show to go more in a survival or mystery-oriented direction, or how they would react if the mysterious presence in the jungle would turn out to be a dinosaur. However, the inevitable happened. Several viewers shared their experience and talked online about the pilot, likely breaking their NDAs. But it didn't end there, as even more reports popped up on LostTV.com from several unsuspecting viewers who had been switching through the TV channels and saw the Lost pilot by accident, not even realizing and trying to figure out what they were watching. Watching the pilot to a show that might not ever be officially seen on regular television was a rather unique experience, but it was a prime example of the inherent danger of these cable previews. If the feedback would have been very negative, it could have backfired and already hurt the reputation of the show to some degree. One popular movie outlet, Ain't It Cool News, even published 2 full reviews of the pilot, sent in by 2 anonymous sources, all of which rather positive. However, the small amount of people talking about the cable previews and the reviews that already revealed the entire plot of the pilot were not the only consequence of the public screening, as a full copy of the original cut hit the internet not long after. While it's an obvious VHS transfer and the picture and sound quality not outstanding, it was still a big deal in the growing fan community. Where it actually originated from isn't 100% clear and will probably forever remain a mystery. It is, for example, possible that Lloyd Braun was directly or indirectly responsible for this leak when the purported VHS tape that he offered to send to Kevin Riley might have gotten in the wrong hands, just like it's also possible that a member of the press or even ABC themselves released the pilot to create some underground buzz for the show. The most likely source was and remains, however, one of the many households in which the pilot could already be seen. Preventing a recording was virtually impossible, and the eventual sharing of a copy only a matter of time. Whoever was responsible for the leak is ultimately irrelevant in the big picture. What's more important was the fact that all the work that Abrams, Lindelof, and their whole crew had done wouldn't have been totally in vain, as their fans would still be able to see what they were able to create in the past few months. It might have been just a small consolation prize, but it would have been a fate that only a fraction of TV pilots are given, when most of them will never see the light of day. After all the positive feedback from the test screenings, McPherson almost had no other choice but to put Lost on the air after all. Braun allegedly even called McPherson to convince him to give the show a chance by letting him know how much Lost means to him, and by pleading that even if the show would turn out to be a flop, it would have at least had the opportunity to prove itself. McPherson did, however, consider a few different options. One possibility, as Javier Grillo-Marx Watch recalled, was to go back again to shoot another ending for the movie, to rework it as a backdoor pilot, with some sort of conclusion, but also an open door to continue the story with a few more episodes. Even the idea to directly order a 6-part miniseries was taken into account. On May 14, 2004, The Hollywood Reporter reported on those internal discussions with the rumor that Lost might be picked up, but that it wouldn't be aired until the mid-season in December or January to replace the repeats of Alias. On that same day, Abrams and Lindelof got a phone call from McPherson, who told them that he ordered the usual 13 episodes, and that they would have to pack their bags to head to New York for the upfronts, at which all the big networks presented their upcoming schedule to the public and to advertisers. This was a shock to them.
I think that there was some conversation about, like, can you do this as a miniseries? Would you be willing to do just 6 of these or 13 of them? And I was quite excited about that version. You know, again, I remember everything to some degree with a degree. I don't remember the specific chronology, but there was a week between when we turned in the pilot, when we gave it to ABC, to Touchstone and ABC, and there was a week where we were dead, where Lloyd had been fired. Steve thought that the pilot was impressive, but didn't think that there was a series there. And at that point, I did hear that Eisner, in particular, I don't remember hearing anything about Iger, but Eisner did not like the show at all. And so I got a call from my agents telling me it's not going to go. Lost is not going to get picked up. And I felt equal parts disappointment and relief, and I had already quit Crossing Jordan, and I felt very weird about going back there, asking for my job back. So I started interviewing for other jobs, and I was in one of those interviews for the show. It was a Fox show that was being produced by Imagine called The Inside, and one of the executive producers was David Nevins, who now runs Showtime, or maybe he even runs like CBS. So, he has a big job. He used to run Showtime. He's been promoted subsequently. But I was in a meeting with David Nevins, and then they were like, they had shot this pilot, and they put me in a conference room to watch it. And it was like kind of like 21 Jump Street. It was about, undercover teenage cops. And my phone started buzzing. And I was ignoring it because I thought it would be rude for me to not watch this pilot, but it kept happening. And I finally looked down, and it was Heather Caden, who was calling me. And she called me and said, the testing just came in on Lost, and it's very good. And I think that the show's alive again. And then the next day, Steve called JJ and I and said, you're going to New York. We're picking you up for 13 episodes.
On the very next day, the Lord of the Rings fan site, theonering.net, announced that a certain Hobbit had revealed that Lost was actually ordered by ABC. On May 18th, McPherson made it official and publicly announced the program for the upcoming TV season at the New Amsterdam Theater in New York. And with this, everybody finally got the confirmation Lost will start on ABC on Wednesday, September 22nd, 2004 at 9/8 Central. McPherson allegedly even butted heads with his superiors because they would have preferred placing reality television in that time slot. A few cast members also dressed up and happily attended the upfront party in New York to celebrate this enormous milestone. The response to the upfronts was, however, very mixed. While McPherson's presentation was praised, Lost reportedly made no good impression, and ABC was referred to as having lost it by some media agency executives for even picking up the project. This was reflected in the sales proceeds at the upfronts. The idea behind the upfronts was very simple. The better the impression, the more money advertisers will pay upfront for commercial spots, as they suspect that more people will watch the show. According to Stacy Lynn Corner, a researcher and executive at Initiative Media North America, ABC sold their 30-second commercial spots for just $133,000, which meant they wouldn't even earn $10 million during their initial broadcast of the Lost pilot, and they wouldn't even cover the cost of production, let alone a marketing campaign. They thus withheld a lot of spots in hopes they could sell them later at a higher price in case the ratings were much better than expected. Overall, ABC earned only $1.6 billion for commercial spots for the season. To put this in perspective, their direct rivals CBS and NBC earned about $2.4 billion and $2.9 billion, respectively. Representatives of the media also didn't really seem to know what to make of Lost, as the first reports indicated that Lost was a rather polarizing endeavor. Robert Bianco from USA Today, for example, picked Lost as the most promising new show from ABC. Kay McFadden of the Seattle Times agreed, even though she already expressed concerns about the longevity of the series. McPherson addressed those concerns in an interview with Adweek by bringing up the series format document, explaining that Abrams has an extensive 35-page Bible which lays out what each episode would be about, and that the episodes could be watched without having seen all of them. However, Diane Wirtz, president of the Television Critics Association, had no good things to say, as she even compared Lost to the ABC series Dinotopia, that was canceled after airing just 6 of the produced 13 episodes. Another review that was anonymously published on AICN was scathing as well, stating that it feels more like a bad TV version of Jurassic Park. The official announcement that Lost was actually going to air on TV was nevertheless a big victory for Lloyd Braun and the whole Lost crew, who finally had a little time to breathe after many exciting and very stressful weeks. They still had a lot of work to do, though, to lay the groundwork for a successful start, including an effort to sway even the toughest of critics.